day. Sorry.
Okay. To give you guys some background, I have a undergraduate degree in neuroscience, so I am trained as a hard scientist. However, I am one semester away from obtaining my master's in public health degree. So I'm a little bit different than most. I am not in a PhD program. I'm not sure if I want to pursue a PhD program, but I'm very interested in how science and policy connect. So I guess we'll see what happens. Most of my research has been in injury prevention. I'm currently in a developmental neuroscience lab over at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. And this is what I study is gun violence. So my proposal is that America needs stricter gun laws and better gun tracing in order to reduce injuries from firearm violence. Nope. I don't know how to work PowerPoint. All right, there we go. So my target audience is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, also known as the ATF. I was going to direct my policy memo to the director and the associate deputy director, Regina Lombardo and Marvin Richardson. I chose the ATF because they are the law enforcement agency in the United States Department of Justice. And really what they aim to do is protect communities from violent crimes. So in order to do that, we need policies that support the protection of our communities, right? They also deal with other things such as explosives, tobacco, alcohol. But in today's age, a lot of the focus efforts are on firearms. So I wanted to give you guys a scope of the problem. Gun violence persists at epidemic levels and remains a public health crisis. Moreover, each year, 38,000 Americans lose their life as a result of a firearm-related injury. And this is obviously the most extreme outcome, right? So dying from a firearm is one thing, but there are hundreds of thousands of Americans who are shot by a gun and survive, and they're left with a physical disability, or if you reside in a community that has a lot of gun violence or exposures to community violence, children and adults will consequently suffer from adverse mental health effects associated with that exposure. So this problem is far larger than the death toll, and it's affecting mainly the pediatric community. So young people are at highest risk for a firearm-related injury. The highest afflicted group is 18 to 24-year-old African American males. It's likely because they're more likely to partake in this risk-taking behavior. So this is really a problem that's affecting our young adults, later adolescents. However, overall, firearm-related injuries is the second leading cause of death for children under 19. And a lot of those injuries are preventable, right? When we're talking about an injury to a child with a gun, most likely they have access to a gun. So how can we reduce their access to a gun? Other key players in this whole conversation is the Centers for Disease Control, and they really collect data that is aiming towards public health. They do a lot of really great tracking. The tracking that we are allowed in this moment is very small. So we know the number of shootings, non-fatal and fatal. There's about 30 states that contribute to the tracking system. And it doesn't give us like a whole picture. So where do these guns come from? What's the extent of the circumstances surrounding injuries? These are data points that are not accessible to researchers or really the public. So it's although they do track things, it's not perfect. And then the National Institutes of Health. So they're really responsible for funding gun research, which recently, actually earlier this year, $25 million was granted for funding for gun safety research. And to give you guys an understanding of how amazing that this is, gun research and gun research funding has been almost slim to none for the last 20 years. I mean, we've seen crime problems since the 80s. We've seen it peak in the 80s, kind of slope off, and now like in the early 90s, early 2000s, we have seen the incidence of firearm rates and crime go up. and there's been no research, there's been no funding support for this research. So this is a huge win for injury prevention researchers. We do have money that is going to support, and that was allocated to the CDC and the NIH. So in terms of needing funding for firearm research, that's accomplished, right? So now we need, researchers a few years to actually do the research and collect accurate data. So my suggestion is that these agencies should all collaborate together in order to aim towards a better data collection system surrounding not only gun violence, but also gun sales. So flipping the script to gun laws. The United States has the most guns and the weakest gun control laws in the industrialized world. And that is just, what we see. And that's what we're attributing to these high rates of violence. Research is supporting the effectiveness of gun laws. So what research does exist currently, a lot of research will support that gun laws reduce gun violence. And it's really that plain simple. Also, a huge argument against passing any gun laws is that it interferes with the Second Amendment. However, it's been supported that all these proposed gun laws are actually compatible with the Second Amendment right. And just for disclosure, I believe that people have the right to own a firearm. I just believe in creating safer homes and communities for people, and especially children. So the role of the ATF. So basically, we know that the U.S. government regulates these gun laws very permissively, and the ATF has some sort of influence to create new laws. I know that currently the ATF is not funded very well, so they have to really choose where they allocate their resources. So that's a huge problem, I would say, with the ATF and having them play a role in policymaking. They do recognize on the website that firearms play a large role in violent crimes, and they really aim to kind of have some sort of enforcement on this. However, they don't necessarily have the resources to do so. But I am proposing a couple policies so that the ATF could advocate for these policy changes and commit to better gun tracing and data collection surrounding guns. Okay, so I have 5 overall recommendations, and I'm going to start with the first 2. So currently what we are seeing are laws that exist, but there's loopholes. So background checks, technically it's a law where background checks have to be in place prior to purchasing a gun. However, there are many loopholes that exist that allow the sale of a gun without a background check. So if someone were to go to a gun show, this law no longer applies to that person. So they purchase a gun over the internet or through a private sale, background checks don't apply to these individuals. Also, licensing restrictions. So there's a lot of loopholes that exist for allowing people with a previously convicted crime of domestic abuse, stalking, or hate crimes to purchase a firearm. And there's no restrictions on people with mental health disorders. So there's no system in place that prevents people from getting a gun who maybe shouldn't have a gun, or maybe who should be looked at more closely. And then talking about children, right? So we know that children is the largest population who is affected by gun violence, and people should be responsible for that. So child access protection laws. If a child were to obtain, if a 3-year-old walks into mom and dad's room and finds a gun that is unlocked underneath the pillow, and they pick it up and they pull the trigger and they harm themselves, that adult should be responsible for not properly storing their gun. Which, maybe I should have also put in my policy recommendations that safe gun storage should probably be a law. And that's not technically a law. It's more so of if you want to, you can store your gun safely, but if you want to use it for self-defense, you don't have to store it safely kind of thing. So maybe that should go into my policy recommendations too. But people should be held accountable. If a child has a gun in their hand or if a 15-year-old brings the gun out to the streets, somebody is responsible for that. There is an adult that is responsible for that child having access to that gun. So there should be laws that hold people accountable for that. So maybe they take place or they use these measures to keep their children safe. And then moreover, the assault rifles. We know that these military style assault rifles, they're not they're aimed for maximum destruction. So the idea of having a gun for hunting or for self-defense, which are the two most common reasons people own a gun, there's no reason that anyone should have access to an assault rifle, which is designed to kill hundreds of people in a minute. This is affecting children. It's affecting people, young people at concerts in Las Vegas. These are affecting people at schools or at churches. And there's really no reason to have these in society. So another policy recommendation that I have. And then lastly, not so much a policy recommendation, but like a recommendation for the ATF. They are really responsible for data surrounding gun sales, and they are not held accountable for this data. They are supposed to investigate gun distributors if there's things that is like alarming or fishy. And word is that they don't always do so. So there's a lot of people who are getting away with selling a gun and not abiding by laws because the ATF is not holding these companies or people reliable. More so, they're not really tracing guns. So we know a lot of guns move across state lines and things like that when we're talking about how many guns someone can purchase and things like that. And there's no tracing of these guns. And the ATF is supposed to be responsible for it, and they aren't. So my recommendation is that they kind of get ahead of this versus staying behind. Oh, also, my last point on that was like data sharing. So it kind of is like the CDC has like this set of data, the NIH has this set of data, and the ATF has this set of data, and none of them talk. So like my other recommendation was like for these people who aim to do the same things, reduce gun violence, they should share data and they should collaborate and they should look at these things from all perspectives instead of their singular perspective of things. So in conclusion, gun violence is a public health crisis. It's here to stay. If we don't do anything about it, we have not done anything about it in the last 30 years. And it's time to have modern gun laws too in these modern times. There are several policies that could reduce gun violence. I mean, I listed 4 right now, and there's 100 that I could go through. And then federal agencies such as the ATF, they have a responsibility, and they're not really owning up to that responsibility, and they're not really accountable for anything except for the fact that they're the ATF. And then previous hesitation has been due to lack of funding and research, but now we know that that's also taken care of. But there's a false belief that these policies are violating the Second Amendment. Also, the NRH is a big problem, or the NRA, sorry, is a big problem in this. But yeah, this is what I have for you, my references.
Wow, thank you. No, and again, this is and now I was reminded at the start your question about do you have to have